Hello, welcome back. It's Sarah from Roadworthy. Um, it's sunny. I wanted to take advantage of the sun, but the sun keeps sort of ducking in and out behind a cloud. So, so brace yourself for some changes in lighting. So, I wanted to do a March wrap up, but when I did a February wrap up, I felt like I was sort of going through the motions and I was sort of reviewing all the books I read in February. And I just didn't feel like I found it very boring to produce, but I also didn't feel like I was really reflecting on my reading in any meaningful way. And so I wanted to do something a little bit different going forward in really um, sort of look at my month of reading and look for maybe superlatives or themes in my reading. So when I looked back at my March reading, I noticed, um, so I read 14 books and only 2 were 5 stars. Just about everything else was a 4-star. And what I noticed was I read 4 books that I felt like maybe defied their genre. I don't know if they defied their genre, pushed the boundaries of their genre, or maybe just did their genre really well. I don't know. I think of genre books as being very plot heavy. And I found these 4 books to be way more than just plot. So let me recount the 4 genre benders, the genre pushers, the good genre books. So the first one is the one that I actually have, which is 5 Decembers by James Kestrel. I read this for March Mystery Madness. I don't really think of myself as a mystery reader. This is sort of touted as a mystery crime reader and actually won the Edgar Award, which is an award given by the Mystery Writers of America. Um, but this is a crime novel, mystery, that takes place leading up to World War II. So we have our Honolulu police detective Joe, who is asked to solve the crime of 2 people who were rather brutally murdered. A white man and a Japanese woman. And the man is the nephew of the Navy admiral at Pearl Harbor. So there's some political overtones to this book, and to chase down a lead, the admiral asks Joe to go to Hong Kong, and Joe does, and he arrives, and um, at the same time that Japan attacks Pearl Harbor and Hong Kong. And so the murder investigation sort of takes a back seat as Joe is stuck in Asia through the war. I think what I liked about this book is the historical setting. And that historical setting is, I think, effectively used in the sense that this almost starts to turn into historical fiction, in the sense that you've got the breakout of World War II, the attack on Pearl Harbor, um, Joe's experiences through the war, and he's basically hiding out in Japan through the war. That was very interesting. Also interesting how the politics of the time period, the anti-Japanese sentiment, um, sort of plays into who's a suspect and who's not in this crime, and the motives for this crime. So I thought that was all very interesting, and for me, I am a sucker for historical fiction. So sort of the blending of the two, and really making the historical setting and time frame um, an important part of this mystery. It wasn't just sort of a back seat. The setting, it was that time period was an integral part of uh, the mystery. I also listened to a mystery thriller, Kala, by Colin Walsh, and this was for the Irish Readathon. But this book is about a group of friends in Ireland, and one of them, Kala, is murdered when they're teenagers, and it was never solved. And so now here we are in present day. Three of the friends in the group are getting together, or come back to town for various reasons. So Helen is coming back to town because her um, uh, dad is getting remarried. Joe is coming back to town to sort of escape his music stardom and alcoholism. And then Mush never left town. And so the three of them, their lives intersect again. And for me, the what happened to Kala, the mystery thriller portion really took a back seat for me in this book. And for me, this book was much more about the dynamics of this friend group. Who and if you have six people together, you know there's some dynamics, right, to the friendships there. People are in and out and maybe more on the fringe than others, and who's on the fringe can really sort of fluctuate over time. So for me, this book was a lot more about belonging, and what do we owe our friends, and a lot of Helen, Joe, and Mush wrestling with their guilt over what happened to Kala, and perhaps their part in it. Um, so yeah, much more again about the friendship group than I think the mystery thriller. But don't get me wrong, this is a page turner. But again, I thought just really, really interesting book. Um, then I listened to Revelator by Daryl Gregory. I did actually see Daryl Gregory speak about this book. Um, and I also listened to his book Spoonbenders several years ago. And that book was described as science fiction. And I'm like, it was? Like, that's not how I would describe that book. Well, Revelator is described as horror. And that's not how I would describe this book either. Interesting, the subject of genre came up in the conversation with Daryl Gregory. And he says he writes literary fiction with weird. And that I actually agree with. So, to me, Revelator is a family drama. This is about a family in the in the 30s. It's a family where each generation of women in the family is a revelator, meaning they can commune with the God in the mountains. And this is their family's personal God. And the women go and commune with the God, and then they come out and share their experience. And the men write down what they say, and then also provide commentary, right? So they're writing their new Bible. And this is taking place at the time where the United States government is having residents leave because they're creating the Great Smoky Mountain National Park. But like I said, really, this book is a family drama. And it is a lot about the relationships between the men and the women and the patriarchy in religion. And there's a little bit of a coming of age component to it. Our we're really following the story of, oh my God, what is her name? Stella, who is a teen in the 30s, like young teen, like 12, 13 years old, 14 years old. And then we're also following her, 15 years later, when sort of events come to a head. Lots of twists and turns in this book. Stella was just a very interesting character. She lives with her grandmother, who is a very interesting character as well. And as the story goes on, you learn about the nature of the God in the mountain, and you sort of learn what the women are holding back from the men. So again, to me, the horror elements, tiny in this book. So definitely one, just a way more interesting book than I think the than the publisher or the marketing is. I think it's selling this book short. One of the Goodreads reviewers described this as Flannery O'Connor and Stephen King wrote a book after watching a documentary on Branch Davidians. And I actually think that's a really good summation of this book. So if that sounds interesting to you, pick it up. And the last book I want to mention is Memory of Water by Emmi. Oh my gosh, I gotta look up Itaranta. And she is a Finnish writer. And this book is labeled as dystopian fiction. It's also listed as sci-fi and fantasy. And I completely disagree with both of those. There's no fantastical element to it, and there's no science fiction element to it. It's really just taking place in the future, and it's dystopian. But again, this was just more than genre. So this is our main character is in the future. She is living in Scandinavia, and the Chinese have basically taken over Scandinavia. And She is the apprentice to her father, who is a tea master, and they have a tea house. And so, in part of the book, she ends up becoming a tea master herself. Um, but it's a lot about water is very scarce, and so there is a water shortage. Obviously, making tea requires water, and the family has a secret spring. So, as she gets older and things continue to evolve, and the water shortage increases, and she starts to be able to understand how everybody is impacted by the water shortage, including her best friend. Um, the 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 burden of the secret knowledge of this spring increases. And so it's a lot about that, the burden of that secret. It's also her struggling with her father embracing tradition, being a tea master, wanting her to continue the tradition of being tea masters, and her mother wanting her to be educated, to move to a city where perhaps her existence might be less precarious. Um, and so it's her trying to figure out what's her path going to be. And it's her journey um, of that sort of discovery and making decisions for herself, and freeing herself from the expectations of her parents. So, again, this book was a much more of a coming of age novel for me than uh, dystopian. There are definitely those dystopic events, or elements, but again, very strong character work, and again, much more wrestling with those parental expectations. So, when I look back on my March reading, it was these are the four books that really stood out to me, and stood out because of their, I still want to say, defying genre. They were more than just their genre. So I wanted an opportunity in this video to shout out these books one more time, and perhaps see if I can encourage folks to pick them up and try them. So let me know in the comments if you prefer this sort of reflective, uh, recap of the month's reading. This is definitely much more interesting and fun for me to think about my reading and reflect on and discuss my reading. So let me know your thoughts. All right. See you in the next one.